The man waiting outside Baker Street had already been declared dead. Welcome to Sherlock File. I am your host, Julian Whitmore. Tell me where you're listening from below. I value every comment. Let's begin. The sound came again, faint but deliberate, from beyond the bedroom door. Mrs. Hudson clutched the banister, and my hand moved toward the revolver in my coat. Holmes raised one finger for silence. His eyes travelled from the door to the dead man, then to the hearth, as though all three formed parts of one equation. "Downstairs, Mrs. Hudson," he whispered. "At once." She obeyed. Holmes waited until her footsteps faded before crossing the room. Instead of approaching the bedroom, he took the poker and lifted the edge of the rug near the dead man's chair. A narrow cord ran beneath it. "A bell wire?" I asked. "Oh, not quite." The cord passed under the chair and rose behind the corpse's shoulder to the bedroom handle, where it had been looped and drawn tight. "The breathing," I murmured, "produced by pressure upon a concealed rubber bladder. When the fire warmed the room, the air expanded through a reed." Another low inhalation sounded. Holmes cut the cord. The noise ceased. "So no one is within?" "That remains to be seen." He opened the door sharply and stepped aside. I covered the room with my revolver. It was empty. The bed was undisturbed, the washstand dry, and the window fastened. Yet upon the floor stood a black leather case. Its lock had been forced, and within lay a collapsed rubber bag fitted with a wooden whistle. "A theatrical device," said I, "or effective when the audience is frightened." He returned to the sitting room and examined the envelope without touching it. "There is writing inside," he said, "but the paper is folded around something harder." The front bell rang below. A minute later, Inspector Lestrade entered, carrying the fog upon his shoulders and irritation upon his narrow features. "This had better justify leaving Whitehall at midnight," he began. Then he saw the corpse. "Good Lord." "Do you know him?" Holmes asked. Lestrade bent close and his expression altered. "Sir Claudius Merivale, the financier, and adviser to the Treasury. He was reported missing this afternoon." "By whom?" "His secretary, Ezra Pike. Merivale left Lombard Street at 4 and failed to attend a cabinet dinner." Holmes glanced at the evening clothes. Yet he dressed for it. Lestrade nodded. "There has been trouble around him for months, threatening letters, foreign agents, and a dispute over naval contracts." "Which explanation does Scotland Yard prefer?" "The one supported by evidence." "A refreshing novelty." Lestrade ignored him. "Have you opened that envelope?" "No." "Then we shall do so." Holmes caught his wrist. "Observe first." "I observe an envelope." "You observe a broken seal, though no one here opened it." "Wax lies upon the corpse's watch and the landing. The address was written before the paper was folded, for the ink has cracked along the crease, and the envelope is not resting flat." Lestrade leaned closer. A ridge showed beneath its centre. Holmes lifted the envelope with the fire tongs. A tiny steel needle projected from its underside. "Poisoned?" I asked. Almost certainly. Our visitor intended the message to kill whoever opened it." "But the visitor is dead," Lestrade replied. Holmes looked at the corpse. "Is he?" "I examined him," I protested. "You examined the body. You did not identify the man." "Mrs. Hudson saw him arrive," said Lestrade. "She saw a man of similar height in thick fog. She heard a weak voice and noticed blood. None proves identity." Holmes drew the curtains and brought the lamp close. He pressed behind the corpse's left ear. The skin shifted. A thin line appeared beneath the hair. With tweezers, Holmes peeled away a strip of flesh-coloured material. Beneath it lay an old white scar curving toward the jaw. "Makeup," Lestrade whispered. "Skillfully applied but softened by the fire."
Holmes opened the dead man's clenched hand and removed the silver watch. Inside the case,
Instead of a maker's name, 4 words had been engraved, for Ilias from CM. "Then this is Elias," Lestrade said. Lestrade turned toward the mantel clock. Its hands indicated 20 minutes before 12, though my watch showed 5 minutes past the hour. Holmes noticed the comparison. "Our clock has been stopped and moved backward," he said. The striking watch was not inaccurate. It announced midnight. "Then the warning below has come too late," I said. "Not necessarily. Men who arrange elaborate deceptions rarely trust a single timetable." He crossed to the window and looked down through the fog. Another cab stood beyond the first, its lamps extinguished. "And Sir Claudius," Holmes added, "has not come alone." At that instant, a cab halted outside. Heavy footsteps approached, and the bell rang 3 times. A man's voice echoed from below. "Mr. Holmes, open the door. My name is Sir Claudius Merivale, and unless you act before midnight, England will be betrayed." Lestrade and I exchanged a glance, but Holmes remained perfectly still. "Do not open the door," he said. The bell rang again, followed by a heavy blow against the panels below. "You heard him," Lestrade protested. "The man claims to be Merivale." "Claims are not identities." Holmes crossed to the window and watched the motionless cab through a narrow opening in the curtain. The second vehicle still stood in the fog with its lamps extinguished. "Watson, remain with the body. Lestrade, stand behind the drawing-room door. Admit the visitor only after I give the signal." "And where will you be?" Holmes had already slipped into the bedroom, and he returned, carrying the collapsed bladder and its wooden reed. "Conducting an experiment." We descended. Mrs. Hudson waited near the kitchen passage, white-faced but resolute. Holmes placed the bladder upon a small table, concealed it beneath a shawl, and arranged the reed behind a vase. Then he stepped into the shadow beneath the staircase. "Open the door." Mrs. Hudson drew back the bolt. A broad-shouldered gentleman stumbled into the hall. His grey overcoat was torn at the shoulder, and his bare head glistened with melted frost. He appeared to be about 50, with iron-coloured hair and a commanding face now distorted by exhaustion. "I am Claudius Merivale," he gasped. "Where is Holmes?" "Before we discuss that," Holmes's voice answered from the darkness, "kindly place both hands upon the table." The stranger halted.
"This is absurd." "Perhaps, but the gentleman upstairs was murdered while dressed to resemble you." The colour drained from the man's face. "Elias." He obeyed at once. Holmes emerged and searched him with swift efficiency. From an inner pocket he removed a sealed packet, a small revolver, and a railway ticket from Charing Cross. "What is in the packet?" "Documents concerning the Admiralty contract." "Originals?" "Copies. The originals were stolen this afternoon." "By Elias?" "No, Elias was my valet and confidential servant. He discovered the theft and followed the man responsible." "What man?" Merivale looked toward Lestrade. "My secretary, Ezra Pike." Lestrade frowned. "Pike reported you missing. He ensured that I would be. He locked me in a cellar beneath my office and sent someone to my house wearing my clothes."
Elias freed me shortly before 11. Holmes examined the railway ticket. "You then went to Charing Cross." "To stop Pike. He planned to carry the documents to Dover and cross to France." "Yet your ticket has not been clipped." "I reached the station too late. The train had gone." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Which train?" "The 11:15 Continental service." "There is no 11:15 Continental service on a Thursday." Merivale stared at him. "I was told." "By whom?" "Elias." The hall fell silent. From beneath the shawl came a long, hollow breath. Merivale recoiled violently and reached inside his coat, forgetting that Holmes had taken his revolver. "That's sound," he cried. "Where did you obtain that device?" Holmes uncovered the bladder. "It was found beside the dead man upstairs." Merivale approached it slowly. I have seen such a thing before. Pike used one during amateur theatricals at Merivale Hall." "Then Pike knew how to create the illusion of a living man?" "Yes." Holmes returned the bladder to the table. "And Elias knew it also?" Merivale hesitated. "He assisted with the performances." A knock sounded against the outer door. Not the bell this time, but 3 precise taps followed by 2. Merivale stiffened. "That is Pike's signal." Lestrade moved forward, but Holmes restrained him. "Pike is either astonishingly bold or believes this house still contains an ally." The tapping came again. Holmes extinguished the hall lamp. In darkness, he opened the door a few inches. A gloved hand pushed through, holding a folded card. Holmes seized the wrist, but the intruder twisted free with remarkable speed. Footsteps raced toward the waiting cab. Git Lestrade dashed outside, shouting for the driver to halt. A whip cracked, wheels struck the frozen stones, and the vehicle vanished into the fog before he reached the pavement. Holmes closed the door and examined the card. Across it, in the same angular hand as the poisoned envelope, were written 7 words. "The dead man has spoken. Ask him why." On the reverse was a smear of brilliant blue fibre. "The thread from the corpse's cuff," I said when we returned upstairs. "Precisely." Merivale stood over the body. His lips trembled as he looked upon the scar beneath the false skin. "That is not Elias." Lestrade bent close. "You are certain?" Elias had no scar. Holmes turned sharply. "Then whose watch is this?" Merivale opened the silver case. His expression became one of horror. I gave it to Elias 10 years ago." Holmes took the dead man's left hand and cleaned one finger with his handkerchief. Beneath a coating of theatrical stain appeared a narrow gold ring engraved with a serpent consuming its own tail. Merivale staggered backward. "Julian Voss." "Who is he?" I asked. "A former partner," Merivale whispered. "A man who died in Vienna 3 years ago." Holmes's gaze settled upon the corpse. "Apparently," said he, "Mr. Voss has suffered the inconvenience of dying twice." He pressed the dead man's waistcoat and found a stiff object sewn into its lining. With his penknife, he cut the stitches and drew out a small brass key marked with the number 17. At once, Merivale lunged for it. Lestrade caught his arm. Holmes held the key beyond reach. "What does it open?" Merivale's composure finally broke. "I want a deposit box at the Imperial Exchange." "And what lies inside?" "The one document that could destroy me." Holmes regarded him coldly. "Then we have reached the first truth of the evening. You did not come to prevent England's betrayal, Sir Claudius. You came because a dead man possessed the evidence of your own." Sir Claudius ceased struggling, but the look he directed at Holmes was not one of surrender. It was the expression of a man calculating whether candour or further deception offered the safer path. "You mistake me," he said. "The document concerns an error committed years ago, a private error." "Private errors rarely require poisoned envelopes, disguises, and murdered men," Holmes replied. Lestrade tightened his grip upon Merivale's arm. "Or you'd better tell us what is in box 17. Merivale looked toward the corpse before answering. 15 years ago, Julian Voss and I controlled a shipping concern in Hamburg. A vessel under our ownership, the Adelaide, was lost in the Baltic with 31 men aboard. The official inquiry blamed the captain. In truth, Voss and I had authorized repairs of inferior quality to reduce costs. "You concealed the evidence?" I asked. We altered the inspection records. Voss kept the original report as protection against me. And later died in Vienna, said Holmes. So I believed. His body was identified by his solicitor and buried there. Holmes glanced at the false scar and painted features of the dead man. Identification, as this evening demonstrates, is a fragile business. Merivale covered his face briefly. Several weeks ago, now I received a message bearing Voss's old sign, the serpent ring. It demanded £50,000 and stated that the original report was held at the Imperial Exchange. Why not inform the police? Because its publication would ruin me and disgrace men now holding public office. Men involved in the Admiralty contract? Holmes asked. Merivale hesitated too long. Lestrade gave a humourless laugh. There is your betrayal of England. No, Merivale said sharply. The naval papers are unrelated. Pike stole them to sell abroad. Elias discovered his plan. Holmes paced once around the chair. Let us arrange the known facts. Someone placed Voss's watch upon this body, painted the face to resemble you, and brought him here under cover of fog. The same person constructed a breathing device, stopped our clock, prepared a poisoned message,
and left a key where it was meant to be discovered. Then the key is a trap, I said, or an invitation. Holmes held it near the lamp. Along one edge ran a pale residue. He scraped a little onto white paper. Chalk mixed with iron dust. This key has recently been filed. A duplicate, said Lestrade. Precisely. Whoever sent it wished us to believe box 17 could be opened with it. The genuine key remains elsewhere. Merivale stared at the brass object. Then the box may already be empty. Not necessarily. London banks do not permit midnight access merely because melodrama demands it. Holmes turned suddenly to the corpse. He loosened the cravat and examined the puncture wound again. Then he asked me for my lens.
You described this as a narrow stab between the ribs. It entered the heart. Look at the cloth. I bent over the waistcoat. The fabric around the wound showed no outward tearing. Instead, its fibres had been pressed inward, and a faint, circular stain surrounded the puncture. A hollow instrument, I said. Possibly a trocar. Used by a man who understood anatomy, or who had practiced the exact movement. Holmes examined the dead man's fingernails. Beneath the right thumbnail lay a fragment of dark green wax. Under another was a trace of brilliant blue wool. He handled both the seal and the cloth from which our thread came, Holmes observed. The dead man helped prepare the deception, Lestrade said, and was killed when his usefulness ended. A sharp cry rose from below. We rushed to the landing. Only Mrs. Hudson stood beside the open front door, holding a second envelope. The fog rolled past her into the hall. "A boy pushed this through and ran," she said. "I could not see his face." Holmes took the letter with the tongs. There was no seal and no visible needle. Across the front appeared a single name, Dr. John H. Watson. "Why me?" I asked. "Because our correspondent understands that curiosity may succeed where poison failed." Holmes slit the envelope carefully. Inside lay a photograph and a brief note. The picture showed 6 men standing upon the deck of a steamship. 2 were younger versions of Merivale and Voss. A third face had been scratched away. The message read, "At 1 o'clock the man without a face will die at the Imperial Exchange. Bring Merivale and the false key. Inform the police. And the original report will be sent to every newspaper in London." Lestrade checked his watch. 35 minutes. Holmes studied the scratched figure, then held the photograph beside the dead man. "The same height," he murmured. "The same slope of shoulder." Merivale recoiled. No, that is impossible. You recognize him? I asked. The third man was Arthur Vale, chief engineer of the Adelaide. He signed the false inspection. And what became of him? He disappeared after the inquiry. Holmes placed the photograph in his pocket. Our murderer has spent 15 years assembling the survivors of one crime. Voss, Vale, Merivale, and perhaps others. This corpse is not Julian Voss. It is Arthur Vale. Then who is waiting at the exchange? Lestrade demanded. Holmes looked at Sir Claudius with sudden severity. Oh, the only man whose death could complete the design. Merivale's voice sank to a whisper. Elias. Holmes seized his coat and moved toward the stairs. Come, Watson. We have 35 minutes to prevent a murder which has already been arranged to appear 15 years overdue. The fog had thickened so greatly that our cab seemed less to travel through London than to drift across some sunless sea. Holmes sat forward with both hands upon his knees, while Lestrade occupied the opposite corner beside Sir Claudius. I watched the lamps emerge and vanish beyond the windows, each blurred flame marking another precious minute lost. You are certain Elias will be there? Lestrade asked. No, said Holmes. I am certain someone intends us to believe so. Sir Claudius turned upon him. The message named the man without a face. Elias was the only person whose features were scratched from that photograph. You told us Arthur Vale occupied that position. I said the third man was Vale. Elias may have stood elsewhere. Holmes's eyes sharpened. You recognized the photograph too quickly for a picture taken 15 years ago. Merivale's mouth tightened. I have seen copies. Recently. There was no answer. Holmes leaned back. The chief difficulty in this affair, Watson, is not the absence of facts, but their excessive abundance. Every object points in several directions. The watch identifies Elias, the ring suggests Voss, the scar denies both, and Merivale names Vale. Such generosity is unnatural. You believe the clues were deliberately confused? I asked. More than confused. They were distributed so that each witness would supply a different identity. Our adversary wishes the dead man to change names whenever convenient. The cab stopped before a massive stone building whose pillars disappeared into the fog. Above the bronze doors, the clock of the Imperial Exchange showed 12 minutes before 1. A night porter awaited us beneath the lamps. He was elderly, with a white beard and trembling hands. Mr. Holmes? He asked. Yes. A gentleman took a private room on the lower floor. He said you would arrive with Sir Claudius. Did he give his name? Mr. Ezra Pike. Merivale swore beneath his breath. How long ago? Lestrade demanded. Perhaps 20 minutes. He carried a blue travelling cloak and a leather dispatch case. The brilliant woolen fibres flashed into my mind. Holmes evidently reached the same conclusion. Did anyone accompany him? A second gentleman came earlier, thin and dark-haired, with a scar near his mouth. He used a key and entered the deposit corridor. Elias, said Merivale. The porter shook his head. He signed the register as Julian Voss. Holmes requested the book. The signature was bold, but its ink remained wet. He signed recently, I observed, or the page was recently altered. Holmes held the paper near the lamp. A faint depression ran beneath the name, showing that another word had first been written and scraped away. Lead us below. The porter unlocked an iron gate. We descended a narrow staircase into a corridor lined with numbered steel doors. Gas jets burned at long intervals, leaving deep wells of shadow between them. Box 17 stood at the far end. The door was open. Before it lay a man in a blue cloak, face downward upon the tiles. Lestrade ran ahead, but Holmes caught his shoulder. Observe the floor. A nearly invisible wire crossed the corridor at ankle height. It led from the open deposit box to a brass cylinder hidden against the wall. A firearm trap, Holmes said. Disturb the wire and the cylinder discharges. He cut it carefully. I knelt beside the fallen figure and turned him over. It was Ezra Pike. His face was bloodless, but he breathed. A bruise darkened his temple, and his wrists had been bound behind him. He is alive, I said. Struck unconscious within the last half hour. Holmes opened Pike's coat. Several strands of blue wool clung to the buttons, but the cloak itself had been draped over him and was far too large. Another transferred identity, he murmured. Inside box 17 rested a single sealed envelope. Its green wax bore the serpent emblem. Merivale moved toward it. Holmes blocked his path. You have not yet learned caution. The report is inside. No, the envelope is too thin. At that moment, the exchange clock began to strike 1. With the first blow, a metallic click sounded behind us. The iron gate at the staircase slammed shut. The gas jets went out one by one, beginning at the far end of the corridor and advancing toward us. Darkness swallowed each numbered door until only the lamp above box 17 remained. A voice spoke from somewhere beyond the wall. Sir Claudius Merivale, you have been brought to judgment. Merivale spun around. Voss! The voice continued, calm and resonant. 15 years ago, 31 men drowned because profit mattered more than life. Tonight, every liar shall receive the name of another liar, and no man shall know whose crime he answers for. Lestrade drew his revolver. Show yourself. A low laugh travelled through the ventilation grating. Holmes pressed his ear to the steel wall. The voice is carried through a speaking tube, he whispered. Our man is not necessarily near. The final gas flame flickered. Then the envelope inside box 17 began to smoke. Holmes seized the porter's iron rod and swept it onto the floor. Green fire burst from the paper, illuminating the corridor with a sickly glare. Upon the back wall of the empty box, words appeared in heat-darkened paint. The first body lied. The second will speak. From behind the steel door came 3 desperate knocks. I stepped forward in horror. There is someone inside the wall. Holmes ran his fingers along the box's interior and found a concealed latch, and the entire rear panel swung outward. A man collapsed through the opening, gagged and bleeding from a wound at his temple. Sir Claudius stared down at him. Elias! The prisoner tore the gag from his mouth. No, he gasped. Elias is dead. Holmes knelt beside him. Then who are you? The man looked directly at Merivale. I am the passenger who survived the Adelaide, and the witness he paid Julian Voss to murder. The stranger's declaration seemed to freeze even the smoke from the ruined envelope. Sir Claudius stepped backward until his shoulders struck the steel cabinets, while Lestrade stared from the wounded man to Merivale. Holmes alone remained composed. Your name? He said. Samuel Harcourt. Merivale gave a hoarse laugh. Harcourt drowned with the Adelaide. So the inquiry recorded, the man replied. The inquiry recorded many useful lies. I examined his head wound. It was shallow. His hands bore old rope scars, and one ankle was twisted from confinement behind the panel. Who imprisoned you? Holmes asked. Voss. Julian Voss is alive? Harcourt looked toward the smoking paper on the floor. Alive enough to command others. That is not an answer. It is the only one I can give. I have heard his voice, received his instructions, and seen men obey his ring. I have not seen his face in 15 years. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Then the voice through the wall proves nothing. A groan interrupted us. Ezra Pike stirred beneath the borrowed cloak. I helped him sit upright, and he focused upon Merivale. "You," he whispered, "you brought them upon us." Merivale seized his lapels. "Where are the naval papers?" Pike recoiled.
You still pretend they were stolen? Lestrade pulled Merivale away. Explain yourself, he ordered. Pike touched the bruise at his temple. Sir Claudius instructed me to remove the documents from his office and create the appearance of theft. He feared an official inspection would expose irregular payments connected with the Adelaide settlement. That is false, Merivale cried. Then why, Holmes asked, did Pike report you missing? Merivale opened his mouth, but no reply came. Pike continued. I was to carry the papers to a private vault here. When I arrived, a man in a blue cloak struck me. Before I lost consciousness, I saw his hand. He wore a serpent ring. Holmes turned to Harcourt. And you? I came by invitation. A message promised proof that Voss had survived and that Elias would testify against Merivale.
And I was seized in the corridor and forced behind the panel. By the cloaked man? No, by Elias. This produced such a silence that even Lestrade lowered his revolver. You recognized him? I asked. I could never mistake him. Elias served aboard the Adelaide as Voss's cabin steward. He helped alter the repair records. Merivale's face changed. Now there appeared something nearer despair. Elias freed me from the cellar, he said. Perhaps, Holmes replied, because he wished you to come here. He crouched beside the broken envelope. Then he examined the concealed panel, the wire trap, and the extinguished gas jets. The machinery has one purpose, he said, to control our movements and our sense of time. The body at Baker Street brought us to Merivale. The message brought Merivale here. The false key persuaded him the report remained in this box. Every step was designed. To kill him? Lestrade asked. Holmes looked toward the ventilation grating. No, if murder alone were intended, the poisoned envelope would have sufficed. Our adversary requires an audience. A bell sounded somewhere above us, once, then twice. Harcourt gripped my arm. That is the night signal for the document furnace. The exchange burns expired securities at 1:30. Holmes checked his watch. 9 minutes. Pike struggled upright. The naval papers may be in the furnace room. And the original Adelaide report, Merivale added. Holmes glanced at him. At last your national duty and private terror lead to the same destination. Lestrade rattled the locked gate. We cannot reach the stairs. Holmes returned to the open panel, but behind it lay a narrow passage running between the vault walls. This was built for maintenance, he said. It must connect with the service rooms. We entered single file, Lestrade leading with his revolver, and Holmes close behind. The passage descended steeply. Pipes pressed against our shoulders, and the air grew hot with every step. Halfway down, Holmes stopped beside a smear of blood upon the brickwork. Caught on a nail was a strip of brilliant blue wool. The cloaked man passed this way, I whispered. Yes, said Holmes, but he was dragging someone. From below came the clatter of a furnace door, followed by a man's cry. We hurried onward and emerged upon an iron gallery overlooking a chamber. At its centre blazed the document furnace. Elias stood before it with his hands bound, and while behind him a figure in a blue cloak held a pistol to his neck. The hooded man looked up. You are late, Mr. Holmes. Holmes rested both hands upon the railing. On the contrary, he said. You arranged for us to arrive at precisely this moment. The figure pulled back his hood. Sir Claudius uttered a broken exclamation. The face beneath it was his own. For several seconds the two identical faces confronted one another across the furnace chamber. The resemblance was extraordinary. The same heavy brow, the same iron-grey hair. Even the small downward turn at the corners of the mouth had been reproduced with unsettling precision. Yet when the cloaked figure smiled, the illusion weakened. Sir Claudius's expression was governed by pride and fear, the other man's by cold amusement. Holmes leaned over the railing. "Why, the workmanship is excellent," said he, "but you have repeated the error made upon the corpse at Baker Street." The disguised man's pistol remained against Elias's neck. "And what error is that? You have copied the face as others remember it, not as it truly is. Sir Claudius bears a faint indentation above the right eyebrow, acquired within the last year. Yours is painted on the left." The man's smile vanished. Lestrade raised his revolver. "Drop the weapon." "If you fire," the stranger replied, "Elias falls into the furnace." Behind them, the iron mouth glowed white. Elias stood rigidly at its edge, his wrists tied and his coat darkened with sweat. Holmes descended the gallery steps slowly. "You have taken considerable trouble to preserve Elias until now," he said. "You will not kill him before he has performed his final duty." "And what duty is that?" "To identify you." A tremor passed through Elias. The disguised man pressed the pistol harder against him. "Speak," he ordered. Elias's eyes moved from the painted face to Sir Claudius. "That is Julian Voss." Harcourt gave a sharp cry, while Merivale gripped the railing. "You saw Voss die in Vienna," Holmes said. "I saw a covered body," Elias answered. "I was paid to confirm the ring and the watch. I never saw the face." The stranger laughed softly. "There, Mr. Holmes, your witness has spoken." "Not fully." Holmes stopped 10 feet away. His hands remained empty at his sides, though I knew his riding crop lay concealed beneath his coat. "You murdered Arthur Vale and carried him to Baker Street," he continued. "You painted him to resemble Merivale. We placed Elias's watch in his hand and Voss's ring upon his finger. 3 identities upon one corpse, a remarkably elaborate arrangement. It succeeded. It delayed us. That is not the same thing." The false Merivale's gaze hardened. "You still do not understand the design." "I understand its vanity. You wished each survivor of the Adelaide conspiracy brought together before the evidence burned. Merivale, Elias, Harcourt, Pike, and yourself. Vale alone could not attend because you had already killed him." Voss shifted his weight almost imperceptibly. Holmes noticed. "You did not stab Vale in anger," he continued. "You used a hollow surgical instrument to drain blood after death and stain the clothing convincingly. The blood at Baker Street had begun to dry before the supposed visitor arrived. Watson's examination proved that." I saw now that Holmes was not merely explaining. With each sentence, he held Voss's attention while edging nearer. "The body was transported in the second cab," Holmes said. "Elias entered our house wearing Merivale's clothes and pretending weakness. Mrs. Hudson saw him only briefly in the fog. Once upstairs, he placed Vale in the chair, arranged the breathing device, stopped our clock and left by the bedroom window." "There is no exterior ledge," I said. "There is a drainage pipe, Watson, and fresh scratches upon its paint." Elias descended to the waiting cab, while Mrs. Hudson guarded the staircase. All eyes turned toward the prisoner. Elias lowered his head. "He promised to clear my name," he whispered. Voss struck him across the cheek with the pistol.
"Ah, you had no name worth clearing?" The movement gave Holmes what he required. His riding crop flashed from beneath his coat and wrapped around Voss's wrist. Holmes pulled sharply. The pistol discharged into the furnace door, showering sparks across the chamber. Elias lurched sideways. Lestrade sprang down the remaining steps, but Voss twisted free, drew a narrow blade from his sleeve, and slashed the rope binding Elias. For an instant I thought he meant to release him. Instead, he seized Elias by the collar and dragged him between us. "Open the outer furnace gate," Voss commanded, "or he dies." Pike stared at the machinery. "That gate leads to the ash tunnel beneath the street." "So that was your escape," Holmes said. "Open it." Sir Claudius descended from the gallery. "Let him go, Julian."
Your quarrel is with me. My quarrel is with every man who permitted 31 sailors to die. You authorized the repairs as surely as I did. Voss's face contorted. I tried to stop the Adelaide from sailing. You signed the certificate because you threatened my family. Merivale's silence confirmed more than any denial could have done. Harcourt stepped forward. And afterward you hunted those who knew the truth, Vale, Elias, and me. I hunted cowards. You became what you claimed to punish. For the first time, Voss appeared uncertain. Holmes's eyes moved to the furnace controls, then to the floor beneath Voss's boots. A thin trail of oil ran from a broken canister toward the flames. "Do not move," Holmes said sharply. Voss mistook the warning for fear and pulled Elias backward. His heel entered the oil. He slipped. And both men crashed against the furnace lever. The iron door flew open. Heat roared through the chamber, igniting the trail across the floor. Flame raced toward the stacked document crates. "The naval papers!" Pike shouted. Holmes seized Elias and dragged him clear, while Lestrade caught Voss by the cloak. The painted mask split from temple to jaw, revealing a gaunt face beneath. Then a second explosion sounded behind the furnace wall. Bricks collapsed inward, exposing a narrow chamber filled with files, photographs, and sealed packets. At its center stood a woman in a dark traveling dress, holding the original Adelaide report over a burning lamp. Voss stared at her in disbelief. "Clara?" She looked not at him, but at Holmes. "You have solved only half the case, Mr. Holmes," she said. "Julian arranged the theatre. I selected who would die. For one instant, even the flames appeared to hesitate around her. The woman called Clara stood within the broken chamber with the Adelaide report suspended above the lamp. She was perhaps 40 years of age, slender and pale, with fair hair drawn severely behind her head. A golden strand had escaped and lay upon the shoulder of her travelling dress. I remembered the hair Holmes had lifted from Arthur Vale's coat. Holmes remembered it also. "You were present when Vale died," he said. "I was present when sentence was carried out." Voss struggled in Lestrade's grasp. Half his painted disguise hung loose from his face. "You promised there would be no more deaths," he cried. Clara looked at him with contempt. "I promised that no innocent person would die. Arthur Vale was not innocent." "Nor am I," Harcourt said.
"You brought me here alive." "You confessed before the Adelaide sailed. Vale did not." Holmes moved between the burning oil and the hidden chamber. "Place the report upon the floor, Miss Voss." Her eyes flickered. "You know me?" "Your resemblance to Julian is slight, but sufficient around the eyes." More importantly, the woman's hair upon Vale's shoulder came from someone who leaned over him after death. There was also wax beneath his fingernails. Though the poisoned envelope had not yet been sealed when he died, he struggled with the person preparing it. "You infer too much. On the contrary, I have inferred too little. Julian devised the disguises, clocks, speaking tubes, and false identities. But he lacked the discipline to organize the entire sequence. He wanted confession and spectacle. You wanted executions." The fire reached a pile of loose papers. Pike and I dragged a canvas cover across them, beating at the sparks while smoke gathered beneath the ceiling. Clara lowered the report, though she did not release it. "My father was chief carpenter aboard the Adelaide," she said. "When the hull opened in the Baltic, He remained below deck so others could reach the boats. Merivale called him careless. Vale swore the timbers had been sound. Voss fled. Elias lied. The inquiry buried 31 men beneath a page of signatures. Julian stared at her. You told me father died before the ship sank. I told you what mother believed. Years later, Harcourt found me. He had heard father trapped below, hammering against a watertight door that Vale had ordered sealed. Harcourt's face tightened at the memory.
There were men alive in that compartment, he said. Vale feared that opening it would flood the engine room. He saved the owner's cargo boat and abandoned the crew. Merivale spoke from the foot of the gallery. I did not know they were alive. Clara's gaze found him. You knew enough to destroy the carpenter's report. Holmes extended one hand toward her. And yet the report you hold is not the original. The chamber became silent except for the crackle of fire. Clara's fingers closed around the pages. You are bluffing. The original inspection report was written aboard ship. Naval forms of that period carried blue horizontal rules and an embossed Admiralty stamp. Your document is plain cream paper. It is a later copy, prepared to frighten Merivale. Sir Claudius stared at it with sudden hope. But Holmes continued before he could speak. The true report exists. Pike's remark concerning irregular payments confirmed that much, but it was never placed in box 17. Julian could not risk leaving it where Merivale's influence might recover it. Clara glanced at her brother. It was the first genuine uncertainty she had shown. Julian's shoulders sagged. You said you had hidden it? I did, she replied. Where? Holmes answered for her. At Baker Street. I turned toward him in amazement. The dead man? Precisely, Watson. Vale was not merely a message, he was a container. Holmes had examined the waistcoat lining and found the false key, yet I now recalled that he had never searched the heavy inner seams of the dead man's overcoat. The report is sewn into his coat, I said, or into the leather backing of the chair beneath him.
Clara needed the evidence placed somewhere neither Merivale nor Julian would immediately search, but where I would eventually discover it. Clara's composure broke. You could not know that. The envelope addressed to me said it should be opened only when the man was dead. That wording was not Julian's theatrical flourish. It was your instruction. The poisoned needle ensured we would inspect the envelope but not destroy it. You intended me to separate your work from your brother's. Julian stared at her with naked horror. You used me. You wanted revenge, she said. I wanted judgment. You murdered Vale, and you brought me every instrument required. Lestrade tightened his grip. That is confession enough. Clara raised the report toward the lamp. Holmes's voice cut through the room. Burn it, and you destroy only a copy. Kill yourself, and Merivale may still escape through your silence. Give it to me, and the true report at Baker Street will be found, authenticated, and placed before a court. Merivale stepped forward. Holmes, consider what scandal— Be silent, Holmes snapped. Sir Claudius stopped, as though struck. Clara studied Holmes for several seconds. Then she extinguished the lamp with her bare hand and dropped the papers at his feet. At that instant, Julian drove his elbow into Lestrade's ribs and tore free. He sprang toward the open ash tunnel, seized a fallen pistol, and aimed, not at Holmes, but at his sister. You have destroyed everything, he said. Before he could fire, Elias threw himself against him. The shot thundered through the chamber. Elias collapsed. Julian vanished through the smoke-filled tunnel. I rushed to the wounded man.
And while Holmes knelt beside the pistol's scorched mark upon the floor, Elias still breathed, but weakly. Not Julian, he whispered. The man at Baker Street was alive when we carried him in. Holmes's head rose sharply. Who killed him? Elias's lips moved once more. Ask the man who examined the body before Watson did. Then his eyes closed. Across the chamber, Sir Claudius Merivale began quietly to retreat toward the stairs. Continuing directly from the previous moment, Holmes saw Merivale's movement before any of us. "Lestrade," he said, quietly. The inspector turned, crossed the chamber in 3 strides, and seized Sir Claudius by the arm. Merivale made no resistance, but the composure with which he had carried himself throughout the night had deserted him. "You cannot hold me upon the mutterings of a wounded servant," he said.
No," Holmes replied. "But I can prevent you from leaving until we discover why you are so anxious to do so." I knelt beside Elias. The bullet had entered high in the shoulder and passed cleanly through. Though he had lost blood, the wound was not immediately fatal. Harcourt helped me bind it while Pike extinguished the last flames among the scattered papers. Holmes, meanwhile, examined the floor where Julian had escaped. The ash tunnel remained open, but beyond a few yards it divided into several black passages beneath the street. "Shall we pursue him?" Lestrade asked. "Not yet." "Not yet. He has attempted murder and escaped." "He has escaped exactly where he intended to escape. Chasing him through tunnels he prepared would waste time and perhaps cost us another life." Holmes turned to Clara.
You knew of the ash passage?" "Yes." "And Julian's route after leaving it?" "No." He watched her closely. "You are lying." She lowered her eyes. "He keeps a room near Blackfriars, a warehouse above the river." "Address?" 17 Bellyard. Holmes shook his head. "Too readily offered. Julian would not entrust his refuge to a sister he deceived, nor would you betray him without calculation. Bellyard is another stage." Clara's face hardened. "You think everyone performs for you?" "Tonight, everyone has." Holmes then approached Elias, who had recovered enough strength to open his eyes. "You said another man examined Vale before Watson." Elias swallowed painfully. "At Merivale House, before we brought the body." "Who?" "A doctor." "Name?" "I never heard it."
Sir Claudius summoned him through the servants' entrance." Merivale broke in sharply. "That is false." Elias turned his head toward him. "He carried a black case with silver clasps. He said Vale was not dead, only drugged. Then he ordered us out." The words chilled me more than the furnace chamber had done. "When you returned?" Holmes asked. Vale was cold. The wound had been made and blood covered the shirt. The doctor said death had occurred during our absence. "What did he look like?" "Short, clean-shaven, spectacles, grey gloves." His left hand shook. Holmes glanced at me. "A physician with a tremor would avoid a thrust requiring such precision." "Unless the tremor was assumed," I answered. His eyes brightened. "Exactly." Merivale's voice became harsh. "Elias is confused by pain." Holmes stepped close to him. "Then assist us."
"Who was the doctor?" "I summoned no one." "Your denial creates a difficulty. Elias could not know that Vale was drugged unless someone told him. Watson found no signs of struggle upon the body, though the wound entered directly between the ribs. Vale was either unconscious or restrained." "He was unconscious when we moved him," Elias whispered. "Julian said the drug would last 2 hours." Holmes became very still. "What drug?" "A powder, mixed with brandy. Clara prepared it." All eyes turned toward her. Clara's colour faded, but she did not deny it. "I intended Vale to awaken at Baker Street," she said. "He was to confess before Holmes." "And instead he was murdered before arriving," I said. "No, Elias is wrong. Vale breathed when the carriage stopped outside Baker Street." Holmes's gaze moved between them. Then the sequence is clearer. Vale was drugged, examined, and stabbed at Merivale House, or stabbed later in the carriage. Elias and Julian believed him alive because the drug produced shallow respiration. Clara believed the same. Someone among you used that uncertainty to conceal the exact moment of death. Lestrade gripped Merivale's shoulder. You had motive, opportunity, and access to the house. So did half the people in this room, Merivale snapped. Not Watson, Holmes said. The remark was so unexpected that I stared at him. What do you mean? The message instructed us to ask the man who examined the body before you. Our adversary wishes suspicion directed toward a physician. Why? Because medical evidence threatens the design. He took Vale's silver watch from his pocket and opened the rear case. Beneath the engraving was a second, thinner cover, but Holmes inserted the false brass key into a tiny slot and twisted. The inner plate sprang open. Inside lay a circle of photographic film no wider than a coin. Pike drew a sharp breath. Microphotography. A reduced copy of the original report, Holmes said. The false key was not false at all. It opened the watch. Merivale lunged, but Lestrade held him. Holmes raised the film toward the furnace light. The body at Baker Street carried the evidence because Vale himself placed it there before he was drugged. He knew he might be betrayed. Can it be read? Harcourt asked. With suitable enlargement. A faint smile crossed Holmes's face, though there was no warmth in it. And now we know why Vale had to die, not for revenge nor silence, but because he alone knew where the true report had been hidden. A distant whistle sounded through the tunnel. Clara turned toward it in alarm. Holmes seized the lamp and extinguished it. "Down!" he cried. A shot tore from the darkness and struck the wall where the film had been held. When the echo died, Holmes's hand was empty. The tiny strip had vanished. Merivale laughed once, breathlessly. Holmes looked at him. "You find that amusing? You have lost your evidence." "No," said Holmes. "I have lost the copy you were meant to see." From inside his cuff, he produced another strip of film. "The genuine one remains with me." Then, from the tunnel, Julian Voss's voice answered softly, "Not for long, Mr. Holmes." Julian's voice seemed to come from every wall at once. "You have fired once," Holmes called.
The report remains beyond your reach. A second shot will reveal your position. You assume I am alone? Watson, Holmes said, your matchbox. I passed it to him. He struck one match and held it low. A shot cracked from the left tunnel. An excellent marksman, Holmes observed, but not Julian. What makes you say that? Lestrade whispered. Julian's right wrist is bruised from my riding crop. That shot was fired without hesitation and with a steady hand. Clara stared into the darkness. Dr. Grayson? Merivale recoiled. Be silent. Holmes turned toward him. At last the physician acquires a name. Clara's voice hardened. Edmund Grayson served Merivale for years. He treated the crew after the Adelaide inquiry and certified Voss dead in Vienna. And examined Vale before Watson? I said. Yes. Merivale shook his head violently. Aye, she lies. Holmes raised the film between two fingers, allowing the furnace glow to catch it. Then Grayson has no reason to remain hidden. A second shot rang out. Holmes's hand snapped away, but the bullet passed harmlessly above it. 2 inches high, he remarked. The tremor is genuine after all. From the tunnel came a curse. Holmes threw himself sideways and seized a hanging chain. The furnace gate crashed down, cutting off the left passage. A man cried out as the iron edge trapped his coat. Lestrade rushed forward and dragged him into the chamber. He was short, clean-shaven, and wore spectacles. Grey gloves covered both hands. A pistol lay beside him. "Dr. Grayson," Clara whispered. "You know nothing," he said. "I know," Holmes replied, "that you killed Arthur Vale." Grayson looked toward Merivale. Lestrade followed his glance.
On whose orders? No one ordered me? Then why murder a drugged man? Grayson laughed bitterly. Because he awoke. He recognized me and said he would expose us all. Us? Holmes asked. The men who survived by keeping silent. Merivale paid us, Voss threatened us, and Vale kept copies of everything. When he awoke in the carriage, he demanded more money. Elias stirred weakly. The carriage, Holmes repeated. So the killing occurred after Merivale House and before Baker Street. Grayson nodded once. I used the trocar from my case. Elias and Julian were outside changing the horses. Vale died without a sound. And the blood? Drawn through the instrument and spread upon his coat. Holmes's gaze shifted to the tunnel from which Julian had spoken. You heard that, Voss. Grayson has confessed. Your theatre is finished. No answer came. Clara rose suddenly. He has gone to Baker Street. Holmes's expression sharpened. Why? The original enlargement apparatus is there. I stared at her. At our rooms? In the black leather case, the breathing device was only the upper compartment. Beneath it is a photographic lens and plate frame. Julian knew the film could be read only through that machine. Holmes turned to me. And he knows Mrs. Hudson is alone. We moved at once. Lestrade left 2 constables, newly arrived through the restored gate, to guard Merivale, Grayson, and the others. Holmes, Clara, and I took the first cab we found. You helped Julian place the case in our bedroom, I said. Yes. Then you endangered Mrs. Hudson. I believed the house empty. Belief is a poor defence. Holmes spoke without looking around. Save your reproaches, Watson.
We may need her knowledge before this ends. The cab raced northward through the fog, its wheels sliding upon the frozen road. Holmes sat rigidly beside the door, following our progress by each turn and incline. Once he opened his hand and examined the strip of film, then concealed it again. Clara watched him with the tense attention of a prisoner studying the lock of her cell. At Baker Street, I called Mrs. Hudson's name. A muffled answer came from above. We found her bound but unharmed inside my bedroom. Holmes cut the cords and asked only one question. Which way did he go? She pointed toward the sitting room. He is still there. The door stood ajar. Beyond it, the corpse of Arthur Vale remained in the chair, but the black case had been opened upon the table. Julian Voss stood beside it.
He holding a revolver in one hand and a glass photographic plate in the other. Behind him, the curtains were burning. You are too late, he said. Holmes stepped into the room. No, Julian, you are. Voss smiled and raised the plate. Then tell me why. Because the film you have enlarged is not the Adelaide report. Holmes opened his hand. It was empty. The true film, he said, never left Baker Street. He pointed toward the dead man's watch. And you have been standing beside it from the moment you arrived. Julian's eyes moved involuntarily toward the silver watch in the dead man's hand. That single glance betrayed him. Holmes crossed the room with the measured calm of a man approaching no danger at all, though the revolver remained levelled at his chest and the burning curtains cast wavering light across the walls.
You opened the inner compartment, Julian said. I saw you remove the film. You saw me remove a film. The enlargement proves it. The enlargement proves only that Dr. Grayson concealed financial records in Elias's watch. Records valuable enough to alarm Merivale, but not the document concerning the Adelaide. Julian looked down at the glass plate. Even from where I stood, I could distinguish rows of minute figures and abbreviated names. Payments, Holmes continued. Bribes made after the inquiry. Useful evidence, certainly, but not the carpenter's original report. Clara stepped into the doorway behind us. Then where is it? Holmes pointed to the watch chain. The chain was broken before the watch was placed in Vale's hand, yet one of its links was newer than the others.
I noticed the difference beneath the lamp, but had no opportunity to examine it while our visitors continued their performance. Julian's pistol shifted toward the corpse. "Do not," Holmes warned. "A bullet will destroy neither the evidence nor the copies already made." It was a bluff, but delivered with such certainty that Julian hesitated. Holmes extended his hand. "The revolver. You think this ends with an arrest? It ended 15 years ago when you chose to conceal a crime and later persuaded yourself that murder could correct it." Julian's face twisted. "Merivale killed those men." Merivale's greed condemned them. Vale's cowardice abandoned them. Grayson's false certificates buried the truth. Elias's silence protected them. Your guilt was less direct.
But no less real. I tried to stop the sailing. You signed the certificate to save my sister. Clara flinched. Holmes's voice softened, though his eyes did not. And afterward you spent years transforming fear into righteousness. You arranged confessions because you could not endure your own. Julian raised the glass plate as if to hurl it into the fire. Holmes moved with astonishing speed. His long arm struck Julian's wrist upward. The revolver discharged into the ceiling, showering plaster upon us. I seized the burning curtain and dragged it down, smothering the flames beneath the hearthrug, while Clara caught the falling plate. Julian grappled with Holmes beside the chair. The dead man lurched sideways, his rigid hand striking the table. The silver watch fell and burst open upon the floor.
And a tiny metallic cylinder rolled beneath the fender. Julian saw it and broke free. He dropped to one knee, but Holmes's riding crop curled around his ankle. Julian crashed forward. Lestrade appeared in the doorway at that moment, followed by 2 constables, and threw himself upon the fugitive. Within seconds, Julian Voss was handcuffed. Holmes retrieved the cylinder with the fire tongs. It was scarcely larger than a match head and formed the central pin of the repaired chain link. "Microfilm again?" I asked. "Not film." He unscrewed one end. Inside lay a tightly rolled strip of thin, waterproof paper. Clara covered her mouth. Holmes unrolled it carefully upon the table. Though stained with age, the writing remained legible. Beneath a detailed account of rotten timbers and unsafe repairs stood the signature of the Adelaide's chief carpenter, and Thomas Voss, Julian and Clara's father. There were further signatures beneath it: Arthur Vale, Samuel Harcourt, and at the bottom, Claudius Merivale. Clara stared at her brother. "You knew father had signed this?" Julian turned his face away. "He gave it to me before the ship sailed. He feared Merivale would destroy the office copy." "You possessed the truth for 15 years. I possessed a paper that would have sent our father to prison with the others. His signature authorized the temporary repair." Clara's expression changed from grief to horror. "He signed because Merivale forced him." "That is what I wish to believe." Holmes examined the final lines. "Your father added a statement declaring that the vessel must not leave port. Merivale signed below it, acknowledging the warning. The document condemns Merivale."
Not Thomas Voss." Julian looked up sharply. That sentence was not there. It was folded within the chain pin. "You never removed the original, did you?" "Vale did. He discovered where your father had hidden it and placed the chain upon Elias's watch." The arrangement became clear at last. Vale had possessed the report, but feared every surviving conspirator. He had hidden it inside an object associated with Elias, then allowed Julian to believe the watch contained only Grayson's payment records. "But why come to Baker Street?" I asked. "Because Vale intended to expose them all," Holmes replied. He agreed to Clara's staged confession, knowing that once seated here, he could reveal the true evidence under my protection. Grayson killed him before he could speak. Julian continued the performance.
I unaware that the principal witness had already concealed the final proof. Lestrade entered fully, his coat damp with fog. Merivale and Grayson are under guard. Elias will live. Harcourt and Pike are giving statements. Julian laughed bitterly. And Clara? She planned Vale's death. No, Holmes said. She planned his accusation. Her crimes include abduction, conspiracy, and several dangerous devices. The law will decide the rest. Clara placed the glass plate upon the table. I will not run. Holmes handed the report to Lestrade. Guard this more carefully than Scotland Yard usually guards inconvenient truths. Lestrade bristled, but accepted it. Dawn had begun to pale the windows when the prisoners were taken away. Mrs. Hudson surveyed the scorched curtain, broken plaster, dead man, ruined rug, with a silence more terrible than reproach. Holmes sank into his chair and reached for his pipe. You owe Mrs. Hudson an explanation, I said. My dear Watson, explanations rarely restore curtains. And the dead man waiting at Baker Street? Holmes looked at the empty chair opposite him. He was not waiting for us, said he. He was waiting for the courage of the living to arrive. Unfortunately, as is often the case, it came considerably later than death. Now, generate the final section of the story, ensuring a satisfying resolution. Maintain the logical progression of clues and character arcs, delivering the final reveal smoothly while keeping the ending impactful and true to the detective's style. It was nearly a week before the full consequences of that remarkable night became known to us. The original report concerning the Adelaide was authenticated by 3 independent experts and presented before a private committee of the Admiralty. The paper, though small enough to have remained hidden within a watch chain, proved heavier in its effect than any document I had ever encountered. It demonstrated beyond dispute that Sir Claudius Merivale had been warned of the vessel's condition before she sailed, and had nevertheless ordered her departure to preserve a profitable contract. The payment records recovered from Dr. Grayson's photographic plate revealed the machinery by which the truth had been suppressed. Inspectors had been bribed, witnesses silenced, and false medical certificates issued. Ezra Pike, in exchange for leniency, surrendered additional papers from Merivale's office. Samuel Harcourt gave evidence concerning the final hours of the ship, while Elias, after recovering from his wound, confessed his own part in altering the records. Merivale was arrested upon charges of conspiracy, fraud, and manslaughter. Grayson faced trial for the murder of Arthur Vale. Julian Voss was charged with abduction, attempted murder, unlawful imprisonment, and a catalogue of offences so long that even Lestrade seemed impressed by it. Clara Voss, though spared the accusation of Vale's death, was held responsible for the kidnappings and the dangerous devices used at the exchange. Her cooperation, and the fact that she had ultimately preserved rather than destroyed the evidence, counted in her favour. Holmes showed little interest in the legal proceedings. The courts, said he, are excellent at naming crimes after they have occurred. Our concern was to determine the act before the name. Yet one question continued to trouble me. On the evening following Merivale's arrest, I found Holmes stretched upon the sofa with his violin resting across his knees. The fire burned low, and a replacement curtain, selected by Mrs. Hudson with pointed extravagance, hung beside the window. You knew before we returned from the exchange that the true report remained here, I said. I strongly suspected it. But why the watch chain? Holmes drew the bow once across the strings, producing a low, thoughtful note. Because every other clue had been made conspicuous, the wax, the fibres, the ring, the scar, and the false key all demanded attention. They were theatrical clues intended to be discovered, and the repaired chain link alone appeared insignificant. You noticed it immediately. I noticed that one link reflected the lamplight differently, new silver beside old, but observation without context is merely storage. Its meaning became clear only after we discovered that the watch contained a photographic compartment. And the film you showed Merivale? A strip cut from the edge of Grayson's payment record. You carried the genuine record in your cuff. No, Watson, I carried another blank strip. I stared at him. Then at the exchange you possessed no genuine film at all? Precisely. You risked being shot over a scrap of nothing. Not nothing, it was a test. For whom? For Merivale, Julian and Clara. Merivale tried to seize it because he believed it contained proof of his bribes. But Julian tried to destroy it because he believed it was the Adelaide report. Clara watched both men before she reacted. Thus, each revealed what he or she believed the evidence to be. I could not suppress a laugh. You set a trap using evidence that did not exist. The most effective traps often contain what the victim brings to them. And Arthur Vale, did he truly intend to confess? Holmes's expression became grave. He intended to survive. Whether he would have confessed fully is another matter. Vale had spent 15 years bargaining with truth. Such men rarely become honest all at once. Then he was neither victim nor villain. He was both. Most men are, when examined without sentiment. I looked toward the armchair where Vale's body had sat. Though it had been cleaned and returned to its usual place, I could not entirely separate it from the pale, staring figure of that first night. There is still something I do not understand, I said. Why did the watch strike midnight when our clock showed 20 minutes before? Julian stopped our clock to make the striking watch seem mysterious, but he miscalculated the effect of the heat upon the mechanism. The watch had been set to strike at midnight as a signal to Elias. It did exactly what it was designed to do. So there was no supernatural element? Holmes raised an eyebrow. Have you ever known me to require one? No, though I confess the breathing behind the bedroom door nearly persuaded me. A rubber bladder, a reed, and an overheated room. Terror supplies the remainder. He lifted his violin and began a gentle melody. And the words upon the envelope? I asked.
Hagee to be opened only when the man in the chair is dead. That was Clara's most honest message. She expected Vale to awaken and speak. Grayson's intervention transformed an instruction into an epitaph. For a time, only the violin filled the room. Then Mrs. Hudson entered with the Morning Post and placed a small parcel before Holmes. It contained no letter. Inside lay the serpent ring, returned by order of the court, and beneath it a single strip of blue wool. Holmes examined both, then tossed the wool into the fire. From Clara? I asked. From Julian? What does it mean? That he wishes me to remember the case. And will you? Holmes looked toward the window, where the winter fog pressed faintly against the glass. I remember errors, Watson. Our successes are far less educational. He placed the serpent ring in the coal scuttle and resumed his violin. Thus ended the extraordinary affair of the dead man waiting at Baker Street. The newspapers later praised the exposure of a great national scandal, though none reported the strange procession of borrowed faces, false names, and altered clocks by which the truth had reached us. To the public, it became the Adelaide Inquiry. To Lestrade, it remained the Merivale conspiracy. But to me, it was always the case in which a dead man entered our rooms carrying the truth in the smallest and least remarkable part of his disguise, and in which Sherlock Holmes proved once again that men may hide guilt beneath wealth, honour, revenge, or even justice, but never entirely beneath detail.